Hello, this is the RPG Pundit, the final boss, and Meatball is upstairs, I think, but in these review videos, she often likes to show up, so maybe we'll see her. Today, I'm going to be reviewing In a Deadly Fashion, an adventure for LOTFP, but before that, let me just say that if you end up liking this video, please hit like. Please subscribe. If you haven't subscribed yet, share this video anywhere you can share it. And be sure to check out all of my own product. We've got World of the Last Sun. The Gonzo Fantasy Companion is going to be coming out in February. And just like World of the Last Sun is all the setting stuff of my Gonzo world, the Gonzo Fantasy Companion is going to be all the generators, everything you need to make weird fantasy races, weird fantasy places, weird magical objects, and a whole variety of other stuff that is just that you can plug into any of your OSR games to add a touch of higher weirdness or science fantasy elements to the game. So that's coming out soon, and be sure to check out all my other products, Sword and Caravan, it's a gold bestseller, and all of my other stuff. If you're interested in adventures, take a look at the Old School Companion 2, which has 26 medieval authentic adventures of a sort that are similar and yet different to the Lamentations ones, which are set largely in the 17th century. Mine are less directed towards grotesque or shocking content and more directed towards historical and mythical elements and authenticity and really interesting investigative stuff. But yeah, I guess that's everything. Check out all my books. The links to all of my products are in the description of the video below, and there's no better way to support me or the things I do. I'm really glad to be doing a video for the first time in a while that isn't about the OGL or the Orc license or how Wizards is screwing up the entire hobby. But if you want me to keep fighting the good fight, then the way to do it is pick up my products. Okay, so this is In a Deadly Fashion by Courtney Campbell, published by Lamentations of the Flame Princess. It's, as you can see, it's a hardcover book, and it gets to, 48 pages? Yeah, it's a 48-page book. And it's basically an adventure. And as usual, when I'm reviewing adventures, I try not to provide spoilers that will kind of ruin the plot, right? But I can tell you, first of all, the basics. The adventure is set in the city of Seville at some point in the 17th century. He might have said specifically when, but I don't seem to remember for sure. What did he say? No, he says it just nominally takes place in Seville. See, there's one of the differences. In my sort of products, whenever I do an adventure that's set in a specific city, you get some important details about the city and the things in it. Here, I'm not saying Courtney didn't do any research at all, because there are a couple of things that he uses that are interesting historical details. For example, in the adventure, there is a criminal gang that he calls the Gardu, which are the Garduños, I think is the original name, which are supposed to have been a medieval and early modern criminal mastermind enterprise that had started out of some lowbrow street hustlers and then turned into this enormous, like the mafia before there was a mafia, and that had incredible influence in the politics of Spain and the Catholic Church and all this sort of thing, right? So like a real criminal secret society, and he uses them in this adventure, and that's kind of cool. Now, mind you, the Gardu never actually existed, as far as we know. We think they're entirely the product of a book, a 19th century sort of conspiracy book that was written in Spain that was very popular and has led a lot of people to think that it presented itself as if it was telling you something that was like actual real history, but we have no evidence of it. But anyways, I don't know if Courtney knows that or not, but if he doesn't, I guess if you're listening, Courtney, now you do. In any case, the adventure really is set up so that there isn't much specific to Seville that goes on in it. And I guess in some ways that's good, because he does say, like, at the back, well, you can set it in any city you like, right? And I say that in my products, but sometimes some of my adventures have specific things that are very particular to a given city, or a given place, that you may or may not be able to translate into. If instead of Southampton you're doing it in Waterdeep, maybe you can put it in, maybe you can't, right? So that allows it to have the opportunity, unlike certain other products in this latest batch of Lamentations stuff that I've reviewed, it could be theoretically ported out of 17th century Seville. I'm assuming 17th century just because that's what Lamentations is usually set in. And it could be put into a more medieval setting or a fantasy setting or whatever, right? The basics of the adventure involve the fashion industry, I guess you could say, in that there would have to be in your setting for this to work, people who are designers of luxury clothing for the ultra rich, usually the aristocracy. And, that's not really all that difficult, because even like that was happening even in like the 9th century, like even in the Dark Ages, there was still, fashion trends. And we can see that because those fashion trends went along evolving, right? So you could still incorporate that. And it involves, somebody being so masterful in their craft of creating this fashion that they become incredibly successful and wealthy. And that's also within the realms of possibility. I mean, obviously, it makes more sense the closer you get to the Renaissance, but it's still something usable. And the start of the adventure is basically that this very famous fashion designer hires the player characters, either directly if they're already well known, or indirectly via advertisement, because he had made a dress fit for a countess, and it's just believed to be the greatest dress that has ever been made ever, and then it disappears. And so this is obviously a huge crisis for the designer. So it's a mystery adventure where you have to make your way to try to find out what actually happened. And there are a lot of possible clues that you are given initially when you meet with the fashion designer, right? So you have the dress itself has disappeared. He can give you some details on who it was meant to be for and what it was about. It was meant to be for a countess's wedding. And then there is also the fact of another patron of the designer who was found dead under mysterious circumstances around the same time. And then there was also another person who was murdered under somewhat less mysterious looking circumstances, who was another client of the designer. And finally, there is another tailor of the city that has been murdered, who was not, a client, but a colleague. And so in all of that, they have to figure out what is going on, right? And I think that obviously it's not too much for me to tell you that there's magical elements afoot. Interestingly enough, Courtney provides various possibilities explaining the supernatural things that are happening, but doesn't really pick one and says it's not relevant because nobody knows the real reason, so the player characters will never find it out. And I could see some player characters being really annoyed by that, and some of my players being really annoyed by that. Anyways, the thing ends up with a fairly intense, situation of supernatural danger. So it's both an investigative adventure and an adventure that has combat elements that are quite risky. This being a Lamentations game, you have to ask, well, how edgy is it? So, like, if you're talking about the book of maps that has like just a bunch of floor plans. That's zero. That's the least edgy product that Lamentations has ever put out. Over to the one that Joe Bittman put out that has like undead pregnant preteens or something like that are also cannibals. Like that's quite edgy. So this one is moderately edgy. The monstrosity itself is not actually some kind of weird fetishy thing or something. But there is like a weird cult. There are some illustrations that are obviously not meant for younger readers, let's say. The designer is the fashion designer has very decadent tastes for the era, and so that comes up somewhat to only a certain degree. It's not central to the plot though. So the plot itself is not something that you're going to be like that's going to be like grossing you out in a sense of things that are meant intentionally to be edgy for the players, right? So it's all right in that sense. There are a few details that some DMs will probably want to skip. Let's put it that way. In brief, this isn't a particularly bad adventure. It's actually it's brief. You could tell, even though it's like 47 pages and it's an adventure, and I'll grant you that none of my adventures are 48 pages. It's still you can see that the material content of it is not like there's a lot of art and stuff in between, right? And so this is the sort of thing that you could run this in 1, 2, or at most 3 sessions, depending on how long a session is for you, right? It's quite a bit more straightforward, for example, than the one that's set in Richelieu's France, which is another one of the recent books that had come out for Lamentations. So this is an adventure that is relatively easy to run, and it's got some interesting elements to it. Now it is a little bit, I think, on the kind of predictable side, in that like I don't need to actually tell you. You just look at the cover and you know that it's like, okay, the clothes have gone bad, right? so that much, anyways, is not going to be coming as a shock at the end, because first of all, you put it on the cover, right? And then besides that, though, any experienced D&D player who's like done investigative adventures will be like, oh yeah, there's a very good chance that that's what's happening here, right? Now, why it's happening, who knows? But then again, Courtney Campbell says that's not important, right? So that doesn't become a part of the design of the adventure. No, you're never meant to find out why it happened. But I think it can be entertaining. I would score it somewhere in the middle of the road in terms of quality, above average, actually, I'm going to say, because there's nothing specifically bad about it. And though I don't think it quite rises up to the level of greatness, it doesn't make any misstep, and it comes kind of close to that in a couple of occasions. There's stuff that if he'd incorporated, at least for me anyways, if he'd incorporated more of the social aspect of it, right? Like there's places where he like touches on it, but it ends up becoming little more than flavoring, right? So you have, the chief designer is a former Jew, converted Jew. Although I don't know if they say he's a converse Jew, or if he's just a Jew in the thing, which would be a mistake here, because obviously the in this era I can't find where he put that, because in this time, of course, in Spain, the Jews had been expelled from Spain and or obliged to convert, right? It does say, is it because he's a Jew in Catholic Spain and someone found out his secret and cursed him? Okay, so he's He's apparently he's a secret Jew. He's pretending to be a Christian. There were a lot of Jews who accepted conversion in name and maintained a secret identity as Jewish people. There's this whole large numbers of Spanish descended Jewish people, and there are people that only find out like at some point, they're like 40 years old and they suddenly discover that they're actually Sephardic Jews and that some of the weird traditions that their family had were actually like hidden Jewish traditions and stuff like that. But, but then that doesn't become a major factor into the story. And it can't really, because he doesn't cover anything important about Sevilla, right? About Seville. And, again, like the Gardu is interesting, but they end up being very secondary to the story. If there had been more element of an actual context justifying the adventure, and I think that's what's missing. This is like, it's a morality tale, but to step out of having to be moral, Courtney said, well, this is happening and we don't know what the reason is and it doesn't matter. So we're never going to have the morality element. There'll never be the moral of the story in the product. It's just happening, when it's obvious that it's obviously got to be happening for some reason, and that reason would have been the element that would have given much more depth to the adventure. That is the problem. I figured out fundamentally why it is that I think that this adventure is, in spite of having all the technical parts in right, it is a mediocre product rather than an excellent one. And it's because he chickens out on making this into a mythical tale by having it be a story that teaches morality veiled in allegory and illustrated by symbols. If he had done that, then he would end up creating a story that would have real skin in the game as far as the questions of what is good and evil. Here there's just a bunch of degenerate people doing a bunch of degenerate things, and then weird shit happens to them and no one knows why. and that's basically it. And so that's why it's a little bit disappointing. I guess that's everything for today. Again, if you like this video, I'll put in also a link on where you can pick up In a Deadly Fashion. And if I think you can get this adventure and you could like this adventure if you're looking for an adventure that is investigative, also with dangerous combat elements. It's obviously slightly horror themed, and I mean most of Lamentations products are. So if that's like the formula you're looking for, and you want to either run it as is or plug it into some other, it could basically be in any kind of city that is medieval or fake medieval on up, as long as it's a big enough city to have a fashion industry, so to say, of like master designers for the ultra rich, right? Then it's okay. It's an okay adventure in that sense. If you're looking for something that has more depth to it, this is not the place. But you're not gonna have a totally there's not gonna be anything disappointing about the adventure itself, and you can always end up deciding to build on it by adding that explanatory element of what was it that caused it. Was it the tailor's own sin? Was it the fault of like the weird cult? Was it the rival that ended up making some kind of sinister pact of revenge? Was it some unknown party that was using the tailor to try to generate chaos in the world? If you're setting it in Seville, I mean, in Spain, does it have to do with the oppression of the Catholic Church over the population at that time, and or the community of hidden Jews that were still there and leading these double lives that were necessary in a way for them to survive and maintain their faith and traditions, but is in some ways, obviously a terrible living of a lie, right? Like and so those are all possibilities that you could choose to add into them, I guess. Anyways, that's it. Check out my own products. If you want some adventures that definitely have, none of them are preaching at you, right? That's the point. I'm not saying you needed to preach at us. I'm saying that adventures that have elements of these moral questions and conflicts, right? They're more interesting. That's the point, right? Like if there's a bunch of orcs that are going to come and wipe out this defenseless village with women and children, right? That's not preaching at you. That's saying, well, this is something that makes a point for the adventurers to risk their lives about. Here, well, they're doing it for the money, right? But the point isn't just that. It gives the players a sense that they're doing something, and that it's something that has an interest and a purpose, right? So, like that, it's perfectly fine to have a party doing things for the money, but having a story in the context of the adventure that shows a world that has some kind of moral sense is always better than one where basically there is no center. And that's because the nature of myth works that way. That you need, that framework has been incredibly successful for most of human existence, and that the fact that we have undone it is the problem. I feel like saying, well, I write adventures that are inspired by old books, because I want to create adventures that reflect the people that created our civilization, rather than adventures inspired by stories written by people who are destroying our civilization. I guess that would be the sum end of it. The old books were written by the people that built everything up, and the new style is basically what is tearing everything down. So check out my stuff. Check out my books. You're not going to be disappointed. They don't preach at you. That's not their message. There's no overt political modern message in my products. There isn't really in a deadly fashion, except that his explanation about Seville is extremely politically stupid. Let's say he says, they don't like Islam and the Moors because they dared to come and make such a successful civilization for hundreds of years. Yeah, they invaded a country and tried to wipe out the people and religion of that country. Why would they hate them? That's a surprise. Of course, if it was the other way around, I mean, the Crusades, I'm sure Courtney Campbell is like brutally against the Crusades, and it was just terrible how they came and tried to impose Christianity on Muslim people in the Crusader states, right? That was really bad. But the Moors coming in and pillaging all of Spain, yeah, that was cool. That was great. They're such wonderful people. All right, I better stop before this goes too far. So check out my products. Currently smoking Lorenzetti Poker plus Argento Natural.